graduate of Indiana University School of Optometry. I believe he graduated about 1932. Only kidding. I'm a professor of optometry at the University of Missouri St. Louis College of Optometry, and I'm proud to serve as the executive director of the GPLI. Tonight's topic is Bitoric GP lens design and fitting. And I'll give my disclaimer there as a consultant to the CLMA. Now, in putting the presentation together for tonight, I do want to acknowledge some special members of the CLMA who really helped me tremendously in an area that I'm quite weak at, and that is manufacturing toric lenses. So I'll spend a minute or two later in the presentation talking about that. And Jan Sabochik and Don Dixon, as well as Josh Adams and Chip Evican, were very helpful in this regard. Now, there are a lot of designs that I will be discussing tonight, but there'll be quite a few that I won't. You know, I'll be upfront and going that front torics, for example, are designs that in a past life, and I think in the late 1970s and early 1980s, it seemed like I fit front toric lenses every day. They're prism ballasted and they corrected for residual astigmatism. With the ability of soft torics to really handle the great majority of those cases, front surface torics have almost totally gone away, but they're having a little bit of a rebirth in terms of scleral designs. We see some scleral designs that add a slight amount of prism to be able to stabilize a residual astigmatism correction. But designs such as front torics and even some of the sophisticated designs like Paragon's dual axis design, I'm not going to talk about. There is a very good presentation that's archived from late 2011, and it's by Clark Newman, that really goes into the very highly sophisticated toric designs that you might find to be very beneficial. To me, the most important outcome tonight is how simple it is to design bitoric lenses. My wife is an optometrist who owns a private practice and does it all, but doesn't hesitate to use our calculators to design her bitoric lenses on a regular basis. Now, I will say that simplicity was not the term that I would use to describe bitoric lenses when, as a third-year student in the spring of 1978, I was in Dr. Irvin Borish's toric lecture at Indiana University, which looks something like this. Now, after about 49 optical crosses, I came away with two real strong opinions. One is that Dr. Borish is a genius and really knows it, and two, I'll never design a bitoric lens. In fact, I remember a few years later, Dr. Rex Gormley from St. Louis wrote an article on Polycon and said it's hard to beat, it's a great new gas permeable material, and I have fitted on up to 5 diopters of corneal toricity, and I thought that's wonderful because then I don't have to use bitoric lenses. And of course, what I will emphasize tonight is bitorics are wonderful, they're very successful, and they're very, very easy to fit. So why do we need them? And actually, in Clark Newman's 2011 webinar, he mentioned that in his opinion, 6% of the patients who come to your practice, not contact lens wearers, 6% of the patients that come to your practice should be fit in GP bitoric lenses, and I thought that was really an impressive number when you think about it. For the people that really have at least 2 diopters of corneal cylinder, you will typically have one or more of the following problems. If you fit that lens steep, it can bend on the cornea and flex and not correct all the astigmatism. It can decenter on the eye. You can have, because there are areas of bearing a lens against cornea, you can have corneal distortion or warpage because the lens isn't optimally fitting the eye, and typically in a high width rule, the edge will be away from the eye vertically, so the upper lid will have more contact with the edge. That can create corneal desiccation, and also, of course, with all that together, you can have more lens awareness. So you see that in these particular photos, where if you have a spherical lens fit on a high width rule astigmat, you can see where that can be uncomfortable with the upper lid coming in contact with an area that has great edge clearance. Again, if you go steep, you're still going to have areas of direct corneal bearing. If you go flat, that is not healthy for the center of the cornea, and that's going to be a lens that's very, very loose and will wobble. But if you fit a bitoric lens, you see the alignment fitting relationship, and really a bitoric lens should fit similar to a spherical lens on a low astigmatic cornea. These are diagrams from Tom Quinn. In fact, you'll see his case in a little while, but this is a spherical lens on a highly toric cornea, and you can see how it falls, not uncommon. You fit a bitoric lens on that same eye, and you have relatively good centration. Certainly that lens is staying up underneath the lid. You see what happens if you have large edge clearance, which can happen with a spherical lens on a highly astigmatic cornea. And what that does, of course, is it creates inferior decentration, more lid to upper lens interaction, and then that just results in a compromised blink and drying out of the peripheral cornea. Now, this is an area that is always enjoyable to talk about, not really, but a question that we still see in 2014 is, what about back surface torics? Why don't we simply go to that type of design? And I can recall the day many, many years ago when I would have those discussions with laboratories, and they would say, well, Dr. Bennett, we'll just send you a back toric. And I go, no, I'd like a bitoric. And it led to lengthy discussions about what I wanted and what it would require them to do. And as I'll emphasize in the next couple of minutes, it's much better today than it was yesterday. Now, both designs are fine when you get above 2 diopters of corneal cylinder. Back surface toric only lenses have toric back surfaces identical to a bitoric. If you put both lenses on a radioscope, you would get the exact same readings. The difference is when it comes to power. Back surface torics induce a residual astigmatism, and typically we've always said it equals about 1/2 of the back surface cylinder of the lens. And this is due to differences in the refractive indices between the lens and the tear film. And you'll be glad to know I'm going to spare you all the equations that another genius in optometry, Dr. Morton Sarver, developed back in the 60s and published in maybe the best chapter on astigmatism, which was in Dr. Mandel's book. But actually to say it's 1/2 of the back surface cylinder is really not totally fair, because that depends on the refractive index of the material. It could even be as little as maybe 25 to 30% of the back surface toricity is induced if it's a lens material that has, for example, a low refractive index, something along the lines of maybe 1.42, as opposed to many of the materials we have today that are in the 1.45, 1.46 range. This theory is simply based on a material that would have a refractive index of 1.5. So aren't you glad I'm reviewing this? Now, whether you go with a back toric or bitoric, the difference between this and a spherical lens is, of course, that you have 2 radii, not 1. And there are philosophies out there that will tell you this is how you need to design both base curves. For example, Mandel-Moore, you can see in most patients, it depends on the corneal sill, they'll recommend going maybe a 1/4 diopter flat in one meridian and 75 flatter than the steep K in the other meridian. Why aren't they both simply on K? Why don't we just go, if the keratometry values are 42 times 45, why don't we just go 42 and 45? Well, most nomograms for spherical lens designs recommend that you go slightly flatter than K because the cornea is aspheric. So you always tend to do likewise with toric parameters as well. Why do you go more flat in this meridian and the steep meridian than the flat goes to the flat meridian? That induces around a 1/2 diopter of toricity. And that's very consistent with the fact that the best patient to fit a spherical GP lens is somebody who has around 1/2 to 3/4 diopters of corneal toricity, because it really creates some tear pumping action. It's not totally sealing off. And so you create that with these types of systems. So you'll see this fit factor from Mandel-Moore again a little bit later. Now, there's a lot of ways of determining the powers, and I guarantee you I'm not a formula person, but if you like formulas, here's Morton Sarver's, where he has the power basically, or the back vertex power in the steep meridian equals the back vertex power in the flat meridian plus the difference in the K values. I don't use it, but it is a philosophy you can use. But let's apply this all to a back surface toric lens. If you have a patient who is +1 -4 times 180, their K values are 41 and 45, it's a high with the rule patient, you can plug this into his formula. You can also look at this as simply 2 FAPs, flat add plus in each meridian. So if you use Mandel-Moore's fit factor in the 41 or flat meridian, you're going to fit that a quarter diopter flatter according to Mandel-Moore. So flat add plus, that's going to be, if the power in the 180 is +1, you'll add plus a quarter to that, and your power in that meridian is 1 1/4. And likewise, you're flattening that meridian by a quarter diopter, so the base curve is going to be 40.75. In the 90, according to Mandel-Moore, you will flatten that meridian by 75, so you will add 75. So if the power in the 90 is these added together, so it's going to be a -3, then the power that you would want by adding +75 is going to be a -2 1/4. I hope that is simple for people. It's 2 FAPs, flat add plus in each meridian. And then, of course, you're going 3/4 diopter flatter, so your base curve in that meridian will be 44 1/4. So your base curves will be 40, 75, and 44 1/4, and that's exactly what you will verify with this back surface toric lens. The problem comes if you think you'll get +1 1/4, you'll always get the power that you want in the most plus meridian. If you think you're going to get -2 1/4 in the other meridian, you're going to be in for a surprise. In fact, when you get to 2 1/4 on the lensometer, it's going to be kind of smiling at you, but it'll be a very blurred smile because you're not there yet. And if this refractive index of the material you're using happens to be around 1.5, you're going to end up with 1.5 times more toricity than you thought you were getting. You see 3.5 diopters here. If you go from +1 1/4 to -2 1/4, that's 3.5 diopters difference. That means the difference is going to be something like 5 1/4 diopters difference. So you'll get +1 1/4 in this meridian. In the other meridian, if it's a back toric lens and a material that has a refractive index of 1.5, is going to equal -4. So that's why I have no there. No, you're not going to get that. So you'll order, if it's a back toric, you'll order this power. The other power will come in somewhere -4. It could be less depending upon refractive index. You'll get these base curves. The center thickness would be whatever a spherical lens would be that's around this power. So therein lies the challenges with back toric lenses. They induce a cylinder equal to 40 to 50%. It can be less than that, again, if you have a low refractive index material. But let's say it's a high refractive index material. What you're going to get induced is essentially half of the back surface cylinder of the lens. So if, as we see in this example, you have 3.5 diopters of back surface cylinder, when you put that lens on a patient and you over-refract, you're going to over-refract -1.75 diopters times 180. So therein lies the challenge. When you put it on a lensometer, you're going to get 3/2 the back surface cylinder the power cylinder that you want. So you'll end up, instead of 3.5 diopters, with 5 1/4. So the most plus meridian is unchanged, and as I mentioned before, that makes the power in the other meridian -4. Again, the primary means of explaining this isn't to make it such that this is really a complicated issue, because if that's the case, we're taking our eye off the ball. This is just to indicate to you where the limitation is in a back surface toric lens, where it differs from a bitoric. So there is a case where a back surface toric is the lens of choice, and that's basically when the refractive cell is equal to like 1.4 to 1.5 times the back surface cylinder of the lens. And what happens there basically is the residual astigmatism corrects for the induced. So again, I'm not going to quiz you on that one either, but one of the calculators I'm going to talk about later will recommend a back toric. I never think of a back toric. I can't remember the last back toric I've ever ordered, but it's nice that we have a calculator that will tell you, yes, this is one of those cases where a back toric lens can be used, and it'll design it for you. So we'll get to that in just a little while. So let's get to the star of our program tonight, and that's a bitoric. So when you correct for the induced cylinder, and that is occurring by just adding plus 175 times 180 to the front surface, that corrects for the induced, and you have a bitoric design. So this is a lens like a back toric that should provide good centration, should fit like a spherical lens on a low astigmatic cornea, should provide good vision, should align well with the cornea so you have good corneal integrity. And actually, if the lab is simply correcting for the induced cylinder, it can rotate all it wants on the eye without affecting vision, and that's termed a spherical power effect. So there are many benefits to a bitoric. But is it like that chalkboard with Dr. Borish's optical crosses? Let's get to that. And that begins with, well, aren't they difficult to manufacture? Don't laboratories would much rather do a back toric? Interestingly enough, I brought that up to the laboratories back in October of 2013 at the CLMA annual convention, and really it was almost unanimous that their preferred design today is a bitoric. And a big reason is they are a lot easier and more reproducible to make today than they were yesterday. In the past, the lab had to squeeze, bend, or the term we like to use is crimp, a spherical base curve radius cut into a blank until the desired toricity was obtained. I always like to call this professional warping. So you warp it until you get the toricity that you want. But then prior to the front curve application, the crimping is released, and then you hope you release it at a point you have a determined amount to satisfy the needed amount of cylinder, and then you hope it doesn't relax after that and the amount of cylinder changes. So it was definitely more time consuming than making a back toric only, and the optics and the accuracy were sometimes not optimum due to the need to use very rigid materials, and also by this relaxing or releasing tendency of the material. They also, and this was an influencing factor as well, more expensive than back toric lens materials. So this is the old technology courtesy of Trueform Optics, and you see some of the crimping devices on your screen. It doesn't appear to be the highest technology, and it wasn't. And over the last 10 to 15 years or so, it has gone away. And it's gone away in terms of what really the new computer numerically controlled lathes, the new technology today. And they term this non-rotationally symmetric GP bitorics, which is a nice way of saying they can cut anything into these lenses today and do an outstanding job. So the ones in today allow the manufacturing of complex geometries not possible yesterday. It's termed, at least from DAC, they term it the oscillating tool technology, and it represents a tremendous breakthrough in the manufacturing process, and it results in a high-quality, reproducible form of bitoric generation. This technology allows the oscillating tool to make excursions backwards and forwards while sweeping across a turning part. And DAC was kind enough to send a video. We'll see if we can get this to work. And this shows the technology as it is at Trueform Optics. And we also had information and photos from Valley Contacts. And again, some of the best labs were kind enough to help us with the manufacturing part. So let's get this going. And this shows the oscillating tool technology. And according to Chip Hebekin from DAC International, they call this oscillating tool technology, in the machine tool world, it's called the fast tool. When you see the tool oscillating, as you see it here, this is where the toric is actually being generated. The diamond tool moves in and out of the material synchronized with the rotation of the spindle, so that the material is removed in the exact area and the exact angle that you need to place the toric geometry. The tool will move in and out of the material twice in one revolution of the spindle. The video is in slow motion. The spindle could actually be rotating at something like 3,000 to 4,000 RPMs. And the RPMs will vary depending upon how extreme the toric radii are that you need in this bitoric lens. The software calculates the fastest RPM and speed that the diamond can actually move. So really neat technology, and they can use it for a wide variety of different designs, but certainly in the bitoric world, it's quite invaluable. So what does that mean? Well, it means that when I talk to another innovative manufacturer, Keith Parker, and Keith is at Advanced Vision Technologies, and we talk about how we really don't need back toric lenses anymore, and we published this in the January issue of Contact Lens Spectrum. And Keith made the really good point that not only with bitorics that you're not really concerned, you don't have to be concerned about induced cylinder, that's corrected for, but the fact that with these high quality lays you can make a bitoric lens today as easily as a back toric. And in fact, the laboratories charge very close to the same amount for both designs. So you really get the best of all worlds today with bitoric lenses. If you need any further convincing, this was a wonderful study performed by Dr. Langis Machad from the University of Montreal, and he and his colleagues compared empirical fitting of high astigmatism with GP bitorics versus soft toric lenses. And keep in mind, there are so many patients out there that we keep trying to put a square peg into a round hole. It might be someone with 2.5 diopters of refractive cylinder or more, where any rotation of that lens can result in blurring, or it can even be somebody as low as 2 diopters of cylinder, but they have a very low spherical refractive error, so again, rotation of that lens can result in blurring. And if they've got at least 2 diopters of corneal cell, a bitoric lens should be seriously considered in these cases. And what Langis did in this study is he took 20 subjects that had greater than 1.75 diopters of corneal cell, so they were good bitoric candidates, average refractive cell minus 3.62. And if you look at their baseline criteria, most of these people really were in soft torics. One patient dropped out immediately, so they had 19 essentially in the study. 10 of them were wearing soft torics. Only 2 were wearing GP lenses, and the other 7 were in spectacles. They had been previous contact lens failures. So keep in mind we have a soft lens-dominated sample that went into the study. They wore soft torics for a month, had a washout period, and then wore bitorics for a month, or vice versa. At the end of the study, 14 out of 19 preferred the vision of the GP lenses. 11 of the 19 preferred to remain in the GP lenses. So again, you have that Coke-Pepsi test. If people are allowed the opportunity, even if they're satisfied soft toric mirrors, if they're allowed the opportunity to be fit into GP bitoric lenses, most of them will be successful in. Well, at this point, I'll take a minute and see if we have any questions. And while I'm looking at that, I'm used to being on the other end and not doing both, but I think I can manage this and tonight. I will mention that we have our webinar scheduled for 2015, and that should be posted any time now. We will have, coming up next year, we'll have ocular wellness and GP lenses with Jack Schaefer, specialty contact lens care with Susan Grimaki, scleral lens fitting for healthy eyes, astigmatic and presbyopia by Melissa Barnett and Stephanie Wu. We'll have GP and custom soft multifocal lens update by Doug Benoit. We'll have 123 GP, which is corneal reshaping, scleral lenses, and multifocal fitting and applications by Mike Lipson. We'll have hybrid and piggyback patient selection, fitting, and troubleshooting by Barry Iden and Jeff Sonsino. We'll have ocular surface considerations for custom contact lens care by Mila Brujek and Dave Kading. We'll have custom soft lens update by Susan Resnick. How to Effectively Promote and Market Your Specialty Contact Lens Practice by Roxana Potter. Myopia Control 2015 by the best in the business, Jeff Walleen. Specialty GP Applications, including Fine-Tuning Scleral Lens Fits and Building Your Corneal Reshaping Lens Practice by Jason Jellica. And finally, in December, we'll have Contemporary Scleral Lens Applications in Ocular Surface Disease and Lens Care by Michael Ward. So we've got an exciting lineup for 2015. I think you're going to really enjoy it, and we certainly appreciate you attending these webinars. So unless I'm missing something, I think I'm going to continue on, and we'll go into the fitting. So the two methods of fitting are like any other GPs. It's empirical or diagnostic, and I think in 2014 we're really in an empirical mode. I think the great majority of Bitorics are fit empirically, and why not? You've got outstanding manufacturing, and you've got simple ways of making the calculations for the design. So let's talk about some of those simple ways. Number one is kind of the old standard, the Mandel-Moore guide calculator. You know, Dr. Bob Mandel is really one of the giants in our profession. He wrote, I think, the greatest contact lens text written by an author. He did seminal research in cornea and contact lenses, and yet if you ask him tonight what he is known for, he will say it's this silly little guide that I did back in the 80s with Carl Moore. And yet it's a very good guide. It's on the GPLI website, so you can go to it. You can either just simply do the calculations on the website, or I think you can still get the pad. If not, you can download the forms from the website, definitely. So let's take an example, right? Mandel-Moore, and we'll put it in the Mandel-Moore guide, and keep in mind all you have to do is input the spectacle Rx and the K values. So, and those of you who have done Mandel-Moore, you know how simple it is, and I just really feel like it does a very good job. So it will also input the fit factor. And we saw that earlier, didn't we, where you have a certain amount of corneal toricity, it will recommend, for example, in a low corneal astigmatic, it will recommend going on K in the flat meridian and a half diopter flatter in the steep. And as you get to 3 diopters or greater, you can tell that it's a quarter flat in the flat and 3/4 flat in the steep meridian. So here's all you really have to do is you have inputted the K values, and you have, in fact, inputted the refraction. So you've got this, you've got this. Mandel-Moore takes it from there. It will input the K value in that meridian, the K value in that meridian. You enter the spectacle lens power in the 180, the flat meridian, there it is. You've got -8 in the 90, and then you'll click, and it will vertex adjust. So now you have the vertex powers. You'll click, and it will enter the fit factor. Remember, it's a 1/4 diopter in the flat meridian and 3/4 diopter in the steep meridian for somebody who has 3.5 diopters of corneal toricity. And then all you do is add. So basically, you're going a 1/4 diopter flatter in the flat meridian, so it's going to design a 42.25. You add a 1/4 diopter, you do a FAP, add a 1/4 diopter, flat add plus to the -375, and it gets you to 350. You do the same in the vertical meridian. 75 flatter, so your 46 becomes a 45.25 base curve. 75 more plus, there's your FAP. You add it to 7.25, and it gives you the 650 power. So there's your powers and base curves. And trust me, back in 1978, I thought these lenses were like, 3 diopters of prism ballast, and, who knows what the powers would be, and it's as simple as this. For people who like optical crosses, and I've never been a big fan, and maybe it dates back to those days, and I owe my career to Dr. Borish, and that's a story too long to mention tonight, so I'm not being facetious in saying I would not be here without him. But yes, when I came out of that seminar, this was not, optical crosses were not something that I really wanted to do, but they do have their value, and if you put the power in each meridian, the refractive power, -4 in the 180, -8 in the 90, and the respective K value, then we can also do it that way. This will vertex to a 7.25 and a 375. Then you'll add the FIP factor, and remember that's 2 FAPs. That's +75 flat in the vertical, +1/4 flat in the horizontal, and you add that, and once again you achieve the same values just using optical crosses. Well, and then there's the GPLI toric and spherical calculator, and I'm real excited about this. This was designed for both toric and spherical lenses, and it will make that decision based on corneal cylinder. So it'll make a recommendation whether to go toric or spherical. And I got to give the credit to Tom Quinn, who designed the toric calculator. And as you'll see, it's very dynamic. And you'll input the refraction K values, and if there's at least 2 diopters of corneal cylinder or greater than 2, it will design a bitoric. And it will recommend a backtoric if, again, you have that difference between refractive and corneal cell. So here is an example, and you see, again, you'll have the patient has a refraction of -1, -3 times 180. Their K values are 41 and 44. So they're a 3 diopter with the rule astigmat. It'll show the eyeball, it'll show the K values and the refractive powers. Then it will provide you with what base curves it recommends. And everybody's a little different. Tom likes to go on K for his flat meridian, and he likes to go 3/4 diopter flat in his steep meridian. So every system's a little bit different. And then it will plug in the tear lens. So you can see that there's no tear lens here. There's a -75 tear lens there, which means you have to correct for that with +75. So there's our friend, Mr. FAP, coming into the picture. So when we do that, our powers are going to be, the -1 doesn't change, so it's -1. When you add +75 to -4, there's your power in the vertical meridian. So this is just a more dynamic way of showing the same thing. But he will also give you more information. You'll have the order, base curve radii, back vertex power. The difference in base curve radii is 2.25, as you can tell right here. The difference in powers, again, 2.25. And you know what that means? It's a spherical power effect design. So that lens can rotate all at once on the eye, doesn't affect vision. And really all we have to do is order this. And the lab does all the work from then. They have the technology to correct for induced. They can figure that all out, and obviously they make very good lenses today. Let's take one more that's a little bit different. This is somebody you see +1/4 -175 times 180. Now this might be someone you could put into a soft toric, but then again, look at that +1/4. That's a very low spherical value, so you should consider a bitoric in a case like this. So again, K values, 3 diopters of toricity. So we'll line it up here, just as we did in the first example. You have the powers and the spherical or the refractive powers in each meridian, and the K values. So let's look. He likes to go small, so it's an 8 diameter, and he has a philosophy really, if you get into a little bit steeper corneas, he'll go to a little bit more of a smaller diameter. You can order any diameter you want. Then it's going to recommend, same design, it's going to be on K here, it's going to be 3/4 diopter flatter here. We'll bring in the tear lens, which is identical to the last example. And then the powers, again, you're going to have +1/4 because there's no change in this meridian. You're adding +75 to here to correct for this tear lens. So you're going to have -75 in this meridian. So difference in base curve, 2.25. Difference in lens power, only a diopter. So since 2.25 obviously doesn't equal 1 diopter, you have what's called a cylinder power effect design. And really what that means is basically they're going to have to correct for the residual. So if that lens rotates on the eye, that residual astigmatic correction will rotate with it, and that can result in blur. Is that a problem? Well, is there at least 2 diopters of toricity in the base curve? Yes, there is. Is the base curve toricity at least 2/3 of the corneal toricity? Again, the answer to that is yes. So you're okay to order. And again, these lenses really fixate well, stabilize well on highly toric corneas. And the final method, and I'll just briefly mention this, is Clark Newman's guide, and we have that on gpli.info as well. And this is a form that you can download. It's in PDF form, and you can download it. And Clark is very analytical. If you look at his, and again, you start to think of brilliant minds, Clark Newman comes to mind. If you look at his webinar from 2011 that we have archived, and he really does get very technical in there, you can tell where he gets all this information, and I'll try to get the arrow to it, where he comes up with his design. And again, you put in fraction Ks and all that information up here. It'll give you all you need to know about conversions for millimeters to diopters and vice versa, and vertex conversion on your left. Then he'll have his version of the Mando-Moore guide down in the bottom right. What you can't see in this picture is he has down at the very bottom directions on how to use it, how you input the information and how to use it. So again, for those of you who really want to custom design an entire Bitoric, this is a useful tool that you can utilize. Well, we've done empirical. Let's jump over the lake and we'll head into diagnostic lenses. And really, in a past life, this was very, very popular. And I know I was always one of those people that liked to utilize diagnostic lenses. I think when we, many years ago, surveyed practitioners, about half of the practitioners who fit Bitoric lenses use the Polycon SBE fitting set. So even though that in the Polycon material is no longer available, the fitting set parameters are something you can contact your local lab or your CLMA member lab, and they'll make you a set in similar parameters. For example, they had 2, 3, and 4 diopter back surface cylinder sets. We have 2 and 3 diopters at our institution. The 3 diopter is probably the most popular, and it's the flattest lens is 40.50 in the flat meridian, 43.50 in the steep meridian. The steepest lens is 45 times 48, and they are in half diopter steps. The powers of every lens is plano and -3. So these are already compensated. The induced has already been corrected on the front. These are Bitoric lenses, so fitting a Bitoric diagnostic lens is really just as simple as fitting a spherical lens, and I'll show that. Now, I mentioned earlier that the base curve radii are not typically equal to the K values. Typically, they're a little bit flatter, and then they're more flat in the steep meridian in relative to that K value. For example, when you're fitting diagnostic lenses, you're going to fit the Polycon or its derivative 3 diopter set. You'll usually select a lens that's slightly flatter than K. And you'll look in your trial set, and okay, I could fit 44 times 47, but that's not flatter than K. That's on K. 44 is equal to 44. So the next flattest lens is 4350 times 4650. So yeah, we'll select that. But you can tell, in this meridian it's a diopter flat, in this meridian it's a half diopter flatter. You want a lens that's slightly flatter to align with a cornea that flattens from center to periphery. And then you also want a slight amount of toricity to assist in tear pumping and centration. So let's fit these lenses. So again, select a diagnostic lens that's an 1/8 to a half diopter flatter than K. Since these lenses are in half diopter steps, there's only one lens in the set that you can select. Perform a spherical overrefraction, and then just as you do with a spherical lens, add the overrefraction to the diagnostic lens power. Only in this case, you have 2 powers to add the overrefraction to. So if we look at an example, you have these K values, this refraction. I mean, you don't have to worry about vertexing, but if you want to, you can. But here's what you have. You select a diagnostic lens that is slightly flatter than K. So here's our 43.5 times 46.5 lens, plano minus 3. We perform a spherical overrefraction, and it's 3 1/4. And assuming that you have a good fit, that you have good centration and you have a good fit, then all you have to do is add the 3 1/4, the overrefraction, to the diagnostic lens powers. So you'll add 3 1/4 to plano, that gives you 3 1/4. You'll add 3 1/4 to 3, and that gives you 6 1/4. So there you have your powers and base curves. Now, what if the patient's refractive cylinder doesn't equal their corneal cylinder, so they have some residual cylinder? So you do a spherical overrefraction, but they still have blurred vision. Well, then you use what's called a cylinder power effect bitoric. And as I mentioned earlier, this lens shouldn't rotate on the eye or there can be blurred vision. Typically, if there's at least 2 diopters of cylinder in the lens, it will remain stable, and I don't hesitate to order these. I like to call this Silbert's rule. It's after Joel Silbert, who's one of our great clinicians in the country, and he wrote a beautiful chapter in a project Barry Weissman and I were involved with many years ago, and he explains cylinder power effect. And if you read this, it tends to be a little complicated, and I promise you I'll translate it in just a minute. But it's the first time I heard that, and it really made it easy for me to think about coming up with the powers for patients in this scenario. So he says if the axes are at or near the principal corneal meridians, add the appropriate power in the refraction to the error power of the corresponding meridian in the diagnostic lens, and then order. So in English, that means, let's say this is your refraction, right here, plus 50 minus 4 times 170. Here's your K values, 42 times 45. You select a diagnostic lens slightly flatter than K, so you have 4150 and 4450, and again the lens powers are plano and minus 3, and this is all based on the Polycon SPE diagnostic set. Your VA with a spherical overrefraction is 2030, so then you need to perform a sphere-Sill overrefraction. Well, your sphere-Sill overrefraction is +1 minus 1 times 170. Your patient's ecstatic. They're seeing 20/20. They're reaching for their checkbook. But you're sitting there going, okay, that's great, but how do I give this vision to the patient? How do I come up with the powers? Again, it's really quite simple, and this honestly is not a bad place to use optical crosses. But basically, it's adding the overrefraction. This is a with the rule patient. So in a with the rule patient, the plano is going to be in the 180, and the minus 3 is going to be in the 90. So what we have is we have +1 in the 170. So we'll add the power of the overrefraction in a meridian, and this is +1, to the corresponding power of the diagnostic lens in the same meridian. So in the horizontal meridian, you have a power in the overrefraction of +1. You add it to plano, you get +1. In the 90, or in the vertical meridian, in the overrefraction, you're going to have a power of plano. And you'll add that to the -3, which is the corresponding power in the 90 of the diagnostic lens, and that gives you -3. So your final powers are +1 and -3. So with cylinder power effect bitorics, you just simply add the overrefraction in a meridian to the power of the diagnostic lens in that same meridian. Really, you can stop here with the technology that you've already witnessed that these laboratories have, and what they can do with peripheries, what they can do with center thicknesses and designs. Really, all you have to do is provide them with base curve radii and powers, and they really can take it from there. They can provide it with a compatible material, appropriate diameter, a toric periphery, and they can make a lens that will very likely be successful. So please keep that in mind. Now, if you want to go further, and I promise you we will, and I like to call that Torix 501, let's talk about a few of the other parameters that you can order. Well, if you want to do your own, if you want to do your own toric peripheral curves, one way of doing that is simply adding 1 millimeter to the base curve radii to get your secondary curve radii, and then add 2 more millimeters to the secondary curve radii to achieve your toric peripheral curves. So in this case, that might be something like if your base curve radii are 8.1, let's round it off, say 8.1 and 7.6. 8.1 and 7.6, add a millimeter, you have 9.1 and 8.6. That gives you your secondary curve radii. Add 2 more millimeters, you have 11.1 and 10.6, and that gives you your toric peripheral curve radii. What material? Well, the most plus meridian is actually a plus lens. It's a +1. So anytime you're dealing with a hyperopic design, you'll want to go to a higher decay material. But if this was like a -1 and a -3, I'd probably go to a low decay material. The center thickness would be the same as a +1 spherical lens. So if the lab tells you we can make it in 0.19, then that's your center thickness. So these are thin designs. The diameter is whatever you want the diameter is. If you like 9.4, order 9.4. If you like 9.6, order 9.6. Same as a spherical. Most of this information is really identical to a spherical lens. All right, we'll take another minute here and see if anybody has any questions. I think, and I have one from Bob Groy. Bob says, any change in conventional wisdom in using bitorics with keratoconus cases with new lab technology and safer materials? It seems to be opening the door for reconsidering this option. Bob, you're entirely correct. I think this is an option that we can use with less hesitation in keratoconic designs. And it is, and you're one of the kings of topography, so you know it really is topography based. And you'll look at topography to see if you have a fairly symmetrical topography, and you do in some keratoconic patients. And you feel like, yeah, this is close enough. Bitorics are 90-degree apart designs, as you know, so you have some of those kind of wacky corneas that you have in keratoconus where every quadrant's different. You know, then, of course, we have quadrant-specific designs, but it does make it difficult to go to a strict bitoric design. But if you look at topography and it looks fairly symmetrical, you can go in keratoconus in these types. So, good point. Well, I'm going to head on and finish. And actually, I'm going to revisit that topic, I think, right now, come to think of it. Thank you, Bob. So let's say you have a difference of 15 degrees or more between corneal cylinder axis and spectacle axis. You have a regular astigmatism. Can you, in fact, use these designs? And interestingly, I remember when I was on the faculty at Indiana University, and I went to my mentor, and I really do, I will mention to you briefly why I owe my career to Dr. Borish, because I had a dream to author a book on gas permeable lenses, and my co-author was Bob Groy, and we sent that to everybody, and everybody rejected it. And I remember one publisher going, well, we don't think it's a good topic, and we don't know who you guys are. So, you know, it did wonders for Bob and I's self-esteem. So then I went to Dr. Borish, and this was probably back in maybe about 1983 or 84, and said, well, Dr. Borish, would you mind writing a chapter on gas permeable bifocal lenses? And he said, of course, Ed, I'll be glad to do it. And of course, he did a great job. I submitted it to his publisher, which at the time was Professional Press, and he had the biggest selling book in optometry's history at the time, and then it got accepted. And if that did not have happened, I'm sure I wouldn't be here doing this webinar tonight, among other things. And so I went to Dr. Borish when I had this case where it was an irregular cornea, and the refractive axis was like 13, and the corneal axis was like 165. And I said, well, Doc, and it was a highly astigmatic cornea. And I went to Dr. Borish and I said, Dr. Borish, what do I do with this case? And he said those three immortal words to me: good luck, Ed. So that means he wasn't really sure either, and probably a Bitoric wasn't going to work in this case. And those types of cases, it doesn't have a high level of success with. But there are cases where it does work. And I'll show you, this is from Loretta Shaka Flynn, and it shows Waring's 5 types of topographies with post-penetrating keratoplasty corneas. And you can see that the types of corneas that you will see. We'll make note of the mixed astigmatism middle left, where about 18% of post-PK patients have, and that's fairly symmetrical when you look at that. It's, you see this meridian and this meridian. And just as Bob was alluding to with today's technology and with so many people using topography, that we can make Bitorics for some of the keratoconic patients that we probably would have been too hesitant to do in the past. Now, we can look at this and go, okay, like 18% of our post-grafts, our graft patients, we can fit a Bitoric on, and I don't know what the percentage would be in keratoconus on healthy corneas, or at least on non-surgical corneas, but certainly some of those individuals you can fit into a Bitoric today. Now, finish with some cases. Pretty straightforward, and these are all diagnostic fitting cases, actually. This is a 23-year-old law student desiring new spectacles, as his vision is not great with his current glasses. He's been an 8-year GP spherical lens wearer, about 10 hours a day. His refraction, as you can tell, in the right eye is very astigmatic, and so we're going to concentrate on the right eye. Left eye would probably continue to do well with a spherical design. So you can go empirical and just plug that into Mando or the GPLI calculator. I have a fondness for the GPLI calculator because of the graphics. But we'll use diagnostic lenses. These are diagnostic fitting cases. So we'll select a lens that's slightly flatter than K. I think this is very similar to what we had before. The overrefraction, let's say, is 175. So we simply add that to both powers, both diagnostic lens powers. That's real simple. You end up with powers of 175 and 475. What about lens material? Well, this is a myopic patient, 2 myopic powers. You can go to a lower DK, or maybe your 25 to 50 DK material. You really can go with today's materials. You can probably go to any material. This is just my own bias. What about center thickness? Well, you want to do a custom lens? Well, again, just whatever the spherical lens center thickness is for a power of minus 175, whatever the most plus power is. In this case, the powers are 175 and 475. Whatever the center thickness is for a minus 175, that's what you should get. And let's just say it's approximately 1/6. What about diameter? Well, it's the same as a spherical, whatever you like. Again, in this case, we went to a 9/4. What about peripheral curves? Well, again, you'll add a millimeter to both base curve radii, and then basically 2 more millimeters to the secondary curves, and so you go from a 7/8 and a 7/3 to secondary curves of 8/8 and 8/3 and peripheral curves of 10/8 and 10/3. Again, that's just one of many, many methods of designing the lens. You can look at the Newman guide on our website to see another method of custom designing these lenses. Let's look at another case. This is a very highly astigmatic case, and again, if you plug this into a calculator, it'll give you exactly what you should order. But we're going to do it diagnostic fitting wise, and so we have somebody who's been wearing soft torics, and I cringe when I think about that. Today's designs with today's peripheries that really provide more of an alignment, lower edge clearance type design, these lenses really don't dislodge as easily, and you can even go to a bigger diameter if you want to minimize the risk of dislodgement even more for somebody who's playing sports. You might go to a 10 or 10/5 type design. But you see what we have here: hyperopic, highly astigmatic. the cylinder tends to match with the amount of corneal toricity, they're obviously having soft lens-induced problems, papillary hypertrophy, vascularization. So this patient's all but shouting out for a GP Bitoric. So if we decide to fit diagnostically, again, we would select, we only have a 3 diopter trial set, so we have to put a lens on that's slightly flatter than K, so it's a 41 times 44. We'll get an overrefraction, a spherical overrefraction. Very, very likely they'll see well because there's no residual cylinder. So we should be able to overrefract, get this value in the right eye, get this value in the left eye, add that to both lens powers, to both diagnostic lens powers. So plus 1 1/4 plus plano gives you plus 1 1/4, plus 1 1/4 and a minus 3 gives you minus 175, and do likewise in the left eye. And so there you have your powers, the vision's good, but you know, in eye care today we have just that condition called ethics. We look at the fluorescein pattern and it just doesn't look optimum. We see kind of a mild astigmatic or mild with the rule dumbbell pattern, and we're thinking, no, we need to change this and reduce that toricity. So really all you need to do is steepen that steeper curve. Remember, you're 41 times 44, but that meridian is like 47 or something close to that. So just steepen that steeper base curve. I just steepened it 1 diopter. I went from 44 to 45, but you could go 2 diopters. You could go to 46. However much you steepen it, add that much minus to the power you've already derived in that meridian. So remember, we had 175 in this meridian. Now it's going to be 275 because we went a diopter steeper. There's that SAM factor, steep add minus. We did likewise in the left eye. We had a 150 based on our overrefraction. We steepened it a diopter, so we're ordering a 250. So again, your high astigmat. We'll finish with a cylinder power effect case. Well, wait a minute. Let's add our peripheral curves. Let's not forget about those. Again, we'll add 1 millimeter and 3 millimeters to each base curve. So if our base curve radii are, for example, 8.2 and 7.5, and I assume that's what they are, the base curve radii are 8.2 and 7.5, we'll add 1 millimeter for the toric secondaries, so they become 9.2 and 8.5. You add 2 more millimeters for the toric peripheries, and that's 11.2 and 10.5. Again, I emphasize again, you really don't have to do that. I don't play golf very well, but I know it's important to keep your eye on the ball. And the ball, when you look down at the golf ball, it's reading base curves and powers. That's the important thing. When we talk about these other parameters, keep in mind that your laboratory, if you give them, you calculate it using a calculator or using diagnostic lenses, and you come up with the base curves and powers, please keep in mind that they will do a great job with the rest of the design. So our final case, 19-year-old male college student with symptoms of eye strain, spherical GP wear times 4 years, minus 50, minus 2 times 180 for the refraction, 3 diopters of corneal cyl. Again, you can look at this case and go, we could go soft toric with him, and I imagine a lot of practitioners do. But again, there's a low spherical refractive value, so if the lens rotates, so goes his vision. Now, with his spherical lenses, it just wasn't a good fit, and probably a big reason why he has eye strain, although there's another reason, and that is the residual cylinder. He has 2 diopters of refractive, 3 diopters of corneal, so he's probably getting some residual coming through. He doesn't have a good fit, and of course a dumbbell fluorescein pattern. So again, we will select, if we're going to fit him diagnostically, a trial lens that's slightly flatter than K. So here we go. His K values, I think, were 42 times 45 or somewhere in that area. Plano minus 3 powers. Now, we do an overrefraction, and of course, a spherical refraction resulted in poor vision, so we did a sphere cyl that resulted in great vision. So how do we come up with the final powers? Well, we use the Silbert rule. You add the overrefraction in a meridian. So in the 90, this is a with the rule case. So again, the 90 is, the vertical. So you have +1 in the vertical. You add it to the -3 power, which is the power of the diagnostic lens vertically on a with the rule case. So you get -2 here. In the horizontal meridian, you're going to have a power in the overrefraction of Plano, and you add that to the diagnostic lens power, and that's simple. Plano plus Plano equals Plano. So there you go in coming up with your powers in this type of case. So I'll wrap up just talking a little bit about Bitoric lens resources. There are many, particularly as we go to GPLI. I've been talking for the last hour about Clark Newman, and there's his photo right there. He's the GPLI Practitioner of the Year award for this coming year, and he actually has our coding and billing module that we have on GPLI. But my real reason is this is the home page, and we're going to go into education, and under education, it's going to give you quite a few options: sphericals, multifocals, keratoconus, sclerals, corneal reshaping, and so forth, and give you all our resources and links to them under that category. So if we go under the high astigmatism category under education, it will show the past webinars that have been given on this topic, including Clark's in November of 2011. Frequently asked questions: when should I fit a toric GP case? And it'll give you a very long answer. And then how do I design and fit a bitoric lens? It will go into our calculators, the GPLI toric and spherical Mandel-Moore. It also has the Mandel-Moore guide, just the printout, Newman's guide. And then we also have our Grand Rounds troubleshooting guide. And Bob Groy, among others, on our advisory board have contributed cases to that. And it's 54 unique cases. It's an online book is what it is if you haven't seen it before. So if you go to high astigmatism, you'll see no less than 7 cases, including people that are household names, I think. Our lecturer a month or two ago, Bruce Anderson. We've got Joel Silver, Tom Quinn. Some outstanding clinicians have contributed cases, and they fit all these different areas. And you see Terry Scheid, Neil Pence, Jill Beyer. So let's look at Tom's bitoric spherical power effect. And these cases are very concise. They're like 4 pages long. They all have the same outline, but they're all different in the sense that they're a separate case. We'll have a back toric, we'll have a SP bitoric, a CP bitoric. We'll do all separate cases. Tom did bitoric spherical power effect, and it'll give the background, the test procedures, fitting, refitting, design, and ordering. So it'll give all the pertinent information. He shows, and you saw this earlier, this is the case where the lens was decentering inferiorly, and then how you go about designing the toric, and he has his own philosophy on how to design a toric. So he'll show you that and how he selected the base curve radii that he selected, and ultimately this ended up kind of being programmed into our calculator. And that's why you see what you see at the bottom of the page, and that is basically Tom's calculator working on. It's the same exact problem that we saw earlier, but it's just so neat to have the graphics on these cases. And the final outcome, of course, the patient was successful, the centration of the lens much better. And on every case that we also have a category at the end for discussion and alternative management options. So you can look at that and go, okay, this worked, but what else could we have used in this case? And I think that's very important for you to know. So, in summary, using the calculators like the GPLI toric and spherical lens calculator, the Mandel-Moore Newman's guide, or using a diagnostic fitting set, all are very, very simple. Fitting or designing a bitoric GP should be just as simple as fitting or designing a spherical lens, and equally as successful with today's manufacturing methods. They can really become your lens of choice in high astigmatic patients, And if this hasn't been a tool in your toolbox, try it. You'll like it. So with that, I thank you, and I'm going to look for, I think we've got a question or two, and I would figure that Ray Brill would be on tonight. Ray's on our advisory panel. Please discuss how you might change your toric fitting philosophy with apical toric corneas versus limbus to limbus ones. Also, do you prefer manual Ks versus auto Ks versus sim Ks? So how you might change your toric fitting philosophy with it would change. And the challenge that we have today, if you don't have topography, you don't have a real good idea of how much toricity there is in the periphery in terms of, does the toricity go all the way to the periphery? Is it limbal to limbal? Is it greater or less peripheral? Like I might have somebody that has even 2 1/4, 2.5 diopters of apical toricity, but paracentral to peripheral, they have very little toricity or much less, and I may try a spherical lens on that patient initially. Whereas if you have somebody that has 2.5 diopters centrally and they have a greater amount peripherally, that can impact how much toricity you want to put in the peripheral curves. You may, in fact, order more toricity in the peripheral curves. So Ray's entirely right. If you have the luxury of having topography, then that can help dictate what design you're going to use and then how much toricity you're going to put in the peripheral curves. And do I have a preference versus manual Ks versus auto versus sim Ks? Well, I use sim Ks because we use topography, so that's my preference, but I can't honestly tell you if that's significantly better or not. It may not be any better. That's just a preference that I have. So good question. Thanks, Ray. And Seema, thanks Seema for being on tonight. Can you also do bitoric designs with translating bifocal lenses? And you can. That's one of the benefits of several of the bifocal designs we have today. You can do toric back surfaces on translating designs. You can do toric back surfaces on front surface aspheric multifocals, which since our world was strictly posterior in a past life, now that we've gone anterior with many of our aspheric designs, you can actually go to toric base curves on those as well. So good question. Thank you all. So I think no, I'm sorry. But if it has, and Seema asked, if it has a CP effect, will it translate? And that's actually a good question. I think it will, Seema. I think if you've got a segmented translating design that has a CP effect, I think it'll translate. What we might worry about, I would think, when they look down, there's a tendency for the lens to, and we do have a little bit of that challenge with translating bifocals, that they do tend to rotate a little bit with the blink, and then when they look down, there's also the possibility they'll shift a little bit, rotate some. So that would be probably my bigger concern, that it could happen. But at least we have that tool available to us in cases where we'd like to try it and these people have critical vision needs. I think it's well worth trying. So again, thank you for those questions. So we will bring tonight's program to an end. Again, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule, particularly at this time of the year. We have a great company who produces these videos, and they are Wink Productions. The names are household names. Sue Conley, who's on tonight. Sue is, in a past life, is an outstanding fitter. She was on our original GPLI advisory board, and now with Ursula Lotzcat, of course, they've had Wink Productions for many years. They put on no less than 40 programs at 20 optometry schools every year on specialty soft lenses, the staple program. And then they're really in charge of many of our programs and resources that we put on the web. So a real shout out to Sue and Ursula. I think also that we really want to thank, and Sue and I were talking about this earlier, thank you all for coming out again in the latter part of December. And hey, come back and join us Tuesday night, January 20th, when the topic will be ocular wellness and GPs, and our speaker will be Dr. Jack Schaefer. So on behalf of the Contact Lens Manufacturers Association President Jan Savocic, GP Lens Committee Chair Darren Nygren, Administrative Director Pam Witham, and the CLMA Board of Directors, I want to wish you all a very happy holiday season and a healthy and rewarding 2015. Good night, everyone.